December 7, 1942. 8,000 feet above the Coral Sea. The morning sun breaks through scattered clouds, painting the Pacific in shades of gold and silver. In the cockpit of an A-6M0 fighter, Lieutenant Saburo Kitamura's finger rests on the trigger. His breathing is steady. His hands don't shake. 30 feet ahead, clearly visible through his gun sight, a damaged American B-17 bomber struggles to maintain altitude. One engine is dead, trailing smoke. The tail section is riddled with holes. Through the bomber's waist windows, Kitamura can see the gunners. Not as silhouettes. Not as targets. As men. Young men probably his age. One of them is slumped over his gun, clearly wounded or dead. Another is frantically working to clear a jammed weapon. A third simply stares back at Kitamura, his face visible even at this distance. Waiting. The B-17's top turret gunner traverses his weapons toward Kitamura's Zero, but no muzzle flashes appear. The guns are empty. Or jammed. Or the gunner has simply given up. The bomber is defenseless. One burst from Kitamura's 20mm cannon would tear through the aircraft's damaged structure like paper. The kill would be certain. Easy. Another rising sun painted on his Zero's fuselage. Another step toward ace status. His squadron commander's voice crackles through the radio. Kitamura, finish him. We're low on fuel. Standard procedure. Destroyed enemy aircraft couldn't return to base, couldn't be repaired, couldn't fly again tomorrow. Every bomber shot down meant fewer bombs falling on Japanese positions. The mathematics of war were simple. Brutal. Unarguable. But Kitamura's finger doesn't squeeze. His Zero maintains formation, pacing the wounded bomber. The American pilot is fighting to keep his aircraft level, nursing it toward the nearest Allied base. Probably New Guinea. Maybe 200 miles away. An impossible distance for a crippled bomber with one engine out and God knows how much fuel remaining. The B-17 crew have no chance of making it home. But they're trying anyway. Doing everything humanly possible to survive a few more minutes, then a few more after that. Kitamura recognizes something in that desperate effort. Something that transcends nationality and uniform. His squadron leader's voice returns, sharper now. Kitamura, acknowledge. Finish the target. Kitamura's thumb hovers over the radio transmit button. In Japanese aviation culture, disobeying a direct order from a superior officer is unthinkable. Bushido, the warrior code drilled into every pilot from day one, demanded absolute obedience. Hesitation was weakness. Mercy was dishonor. But pulling the trigger would mean killing men who could no longer defend themselves. Men who had already been beaten. Who posed no further threat. Whose survival depended entirely on whether Kitamura decided to grant it. For reasons he cannot fully articulate even to himself, Kitamura eases his Zero away from the bomber. He transmits a simple message: target damaged beyond recovery. Breaking off to conserve ammunition. A lie. His ammunition bins are nearly full. But it's a lie that provides both explanation and deniability. The squadron leader's response is a grunt of acknowledgement. The Zero formation turns south, heading back toward Rabaul. Behind them, the crippled B-17 continues its desperate flight northward, trailing smoke like a wounded bird refusing to fall. Lieutenant Kitamura will never know if that bomber made it home. He'll never learn the names of the crew he chose not to kill. In the vast machinery of the Pacific War, this moment represents nothing. No official record will note it. No medal will commemorate it. No strategic outcome hinges on it. But for Saburo Kitamura, this moment changes everything. Because in choosing not to pull the trigger, he has discovered something more terrifying than any enemy: doubt. And in a war that demands absolute conviction, doubt is a crack in the armor that will only widen with time. To understand why Kitamura's moment of hesitation was so extraordinary, you must understand what created him. The Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service didn't recruit pilots. It forged them. The process began in 1937, when 14-year-old Saburo Kitamura stood in a snow-covered courtyard at the Chuchiura Naval Air Group, along with 2,000 other candidates competing for 70 positions. The entrance examination lasted 3 days. Physical testing pushed boys to collapse. Mathematical problems eliminated those who couldn't calculate fuel consumption and wind drift in their heads. The final test was psychological. Candidates were awakened at midnight, led to individual rooms, and ordered to sit in perfect size position for 4 hours without moving. Guards circulated, looking for any sign of weakness. Any fidget. Any shift in posture. Saburo passed. 1,930 others didn't. The training that followed made the entrance exam look merciful. Flight instruction began with gliders, then progressed to basic trainers. But before any candidate touched an aircraft, they endured 6 months of indoctrination designed to erase individual identity and replace it with absolute loyalty to the Emperor and the Naval Air Service. Morning wake-up came at 4:30 a.m. Before breakfast, candidates ran 5 miles carrying 40-pound packs. The dining hall held no chairs. Trainees ate standing up, finishing meals in under 5 minutes. Bathroom breaks were timed. Sleeping was interrupted randomly by instructors who demanded immediate aircraft recognition drills. The physical hardship was intentional. It taught pilots to function effectively while exhausted, cold, hungry, and sleep-deprived. Conditions they would face constantly in combat. But the psychological indoctrination ran deeper. Instructors repeatedly emphasized that a pilot's life belonged to the Emperor. Survival was desirable only insofar as it enabled future service. Death in battle was the highest honor a warrior could achieve. This wasn't abstract philosophy. It was drilled into trainees through constant repetition until it became reflexive. During aircraft recognition training, instructors would suddenly shout, "Banzai!" And every trainee was expected to immediately respond with the full phrase, "Tenno Hika Banzai!" Long live the Emperor. Any delay resulted in punishment. Usually physical. Always public. By the time Saburo Kitamura progressed to actual flight training in 1939, he had internalized the warrior code so completely that questioning orders literally didn't occur to him. His first solo flight in a Type 96 carrier fighter filled him with joy not because of the freedom of flight, but because he was one step closer to serving the Emperor effectively. Advanced combat training emphasized aggression above all else. Instructors taught that the Zero's maneuverability made it superior to any enemy fighter. That Japanese pilot's spiritual strength outweighed American material advantages. That hesitation in combat was fatal. When you achieved a position of advantage over an enemy, you pressed the attack immediately and without mercy. Gunnery training reinforced this mindset. Targets were silhouettes of American and British aircraft. Instructors graded not just on accuracy but on the aggressiveness of the attack run. Pilots who showed caution, who pulled out of their dives early or who hesitated before firing, received poor marks and public criticism. The message was explicit. Combat was not a place for thought. It was a place for instant action guided by training and warrior spirit. An enemy aircraft was not a machine containing human beings. It was a target to be destroyed. Thinking of the enemy as human was a weakness that would get you killed. This philosophy made tactical sense in early 1940. The Zero was genuinely superior to most opponents. Japanese pilots had years of combat experience over China. The combination of superior equipment, better training, and aggressive tactics produced extraordinary results. When Saburo Kitamura joined the Tainan Air Group in March 1941, assigned to a Zero fighter unit preparing for the coming war, he represented the culmination of Japan's elite pilot program. He had 650 hours of flight time. He could loop, roll, and maneuver his Zero with precision that seemed supernatural. He could identify any aircraft by silhouette at a distance. He could calculate deflection angles and lead distances instinctively. He believed absolutely in the righteousness of Japan's cause and the invincibility of its warriors. And most importantly, he had never questioned an order. Never hesitated in training. Never allowed individual thought to interfere with the collective mission. He was the perfect product of a system designed to create warriors without doubt. Men who could kill without hesitation because they never conceived of doing anything else. Which makes what happened on December 7, 1942, all the more remarkable. Because the moment Saburo Kitamura chose not to pull that trigger, he stopped being the product of his training and became something his instructors had never prepared him for. A man making his own moral choice. Philippines. His training has prepared him for this moment. His entire adult life has pointed toward this first combat mission. What no amount of training could have prepared him for was how easy it would be. The American fighters at Clark Field never get airborne. Kitamura's formation arrives to find rows of P-40 Warhawks parked in neat lines, gleaming in the tropical sun. Perfect targets. Defenseless. His first combat victory is a P-40 destroyed on the ground, torn apart by 20mm cannon fire as it sits motionless on the tarmac. It feels nothing like Kitamura imagined. There's no aerial duel. No test of skill against a worthy opponent. Just the mechanical act of aiming at a stationary target and squeezing the trigger. But his flight leader's congratulations are genuine. Destroyed aircraft are destroyed aircraft. The method doesn't matter. Only the result counts. His first air-to-air kill comes 3 days later over the Gulf of Lingayen. An American B-17 bomber, part of a small formation attempting to strike Japanese invasion forces. Kitamura's Zero dives from above and behind, the classic attack position. He opens fire at 300 meters. Tracers walk up the bomber's fuselage. The B-17's tail gunner returns fire, but the .50 caliber rounds pass harmlessly behind Kitamura's Zero as he breaks away. 2 more passes. The bomber begins trailing smoke. On the 4th attack run, the B-17's wing suddenly folds upward and the entire aircraft spins toward the ocean below. Kitamura watches it impact the water, leaving a spreading circle of debris and oil. His radio erupts with congratulations from his squadron mates. He is officially an ace. 5 aerial victories in his first week of combat. But something nags at him. Something that shouldn't matter but does. As the B-17 spun down just before it hit the water, he saw tiny figures falling from the aircraft. Parachutes. Some bloomed white against the blue sky. Others didn't open. The men whose parachutes failed simply fell, tumbling like dropped dolls until they hit the ocean and disappeared. Kitamura forces the image from his mind. This is war. Men die in war. He did his duty. The bomber will never bomb Japanese troops. The mathematics are simple. Unarguable. But that night, lying in his barracks, he keeps seeing those falling figures. Wondering which ones lived and which didn't. Wondering if any of them survived impact with the water only to drown because they were too injured to swim. He doesn't share these thoughts with his squadron mates. They're celebrating. Toasting their victories with sake. Laughing about how easily the Americans died. How their vaunted B-17 flying fortresses caught fire and fell apart under sustained 20mm cannon fire. How American pilots seemed confused, slow to react, easily outmaneuvered. And it's true. In those early months, the Pacific War is a series of Japanese victories so overwhelming they begin to seem inevitable. American and British pilots fly outdated aircraft with inadequate training. Japanese Zero fighters dominate every engagement. Kitamura's kill count climbs. 7, then 10, then 15. By March 1942, he is recognized as one of the Tainan Air Group's rising stars. But the easy victories create their own problem. When every enemy you encounter dies quickly, combat begins to feel less like a test of warrior spirit and more like systematic slaughter. The Americans and British and Dutch pilots Kitamura fights aren't cowards. They're simply outmatched. They fly inferior aircraft with insufficient training against an enemy that has every advantage. April 1942. The Japanese carrier force strikes Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka. Kitamura's Zero escorts dive bombers attacking Colombo Harbor. British Hawker Hurricane fighters scramble to intercept. The Hurricanes are brave. Their pilots press attacks even as Zeros tear through their formation. But bravery can't overcome technical inferiority. Kitamura guns down 2 Hurricanes in under 3 minutes. Both pilots bail out successfully. He watches one pilot descend toward the ocean, parachute swaying in the tropical wind. The pilot is close enough that Kitamura can see his face. A young man. Probably early 20s. Looking up at Kitamura's Zero circling above him. Protocol, unspoken but understood among some Japanese pilots, was that you didn't shoot parachuting enemy aviators. They were out of the fight. Defenseless. Shooting them served no tactical purpose. But Kitamura knows other pilots who did it anyway. Who argued that a pilot who survived would fly again tomorrow. That mercy was a luxury war couldn't afford. Kitamura lets the Hurricane pilot float down unmolested. His squadron leader notices. After they land, he pulls Kitamura aside. You had a chance for another kill. It's not quite a criticism. Not quite approval. Just an observation. Kitamura doesn't respond. What could he say? That he didn't want to kill a defenseless man? That shooting a parachuting pilot felt too much like murder? These aren't thoughts a warrior is supposed to have. So Kitamura pushes them down. Focuses on his duty. Continues flying missions. His kill count reaches 20. Then 25. He is decorated. Promoted. Held up as an example of Japanese fighting spirit. And with every victory, with every enemy aircraft that falls in flames, the tiny crack in his warrior's conviction grows slightly wider. Because underneath all the training, all the indoctrination, all the Bushido philosophy, Saburo Kitamura is discovering an uncomfortable truth. He doesn't hate his enemies. He doesn't even particularly want to kill them. He wants to serve his country. Wants to be a good pilot. Wants to do his duty. But the act of killing men who have become real to him, men he can see and individualize, is becoming progressively harder. By December 1942, when he encounters that crippled B-17 over the Coral Sea, the crack has widened into a chasm. And in that moment, when his finger rests on the trigger and he can see the American gunners clearly, the question he's been avoiding for months finally demands an answer. What kind of warrior am I willing to be? December 7, 1942. Let's return to that moment above the Coral Sea in detail. Because what appears in official records as a brief encounter actually unfolds over 7 minutes that will haunt Saburo Kitamura for the rest of his life. The B-17 is a B-17E model from the 43rd Bombardment Group, serial number 41 to 9234. The bomber's name, painted on its nose, is Little Dixie. The crew consists of 10 men. Pilot, Captain Robert Henderson, age 24, from Montgomery, Alabama. Co-pilot, First Lieutenant James Mora, 22, from San Diego, California. Navigator, Second Lieutenant William Chen, 23, born in San Francisco to Chinese immigrant parents. Kitamura can't know these details. But he can see that the crew is young. That they're fighting to save their aircraft. That they're now completely at his mercy. The encounter begins when Kitamura's squadron intercepts Little Dixie, returning from a bombing mission against Japanese shipping near Rabaul. The bomber has already been hit by anti-aircraft fire. One engine is dead. The tail gunner is seriously wounded. The radio operator is dead, killed by a shell fragment that penetrated the fuselage. The initial attack by Kitamura's squadron mates shreds Little Dixie's defensive capabilities. The top turret gunner, Sergeant Michael Kowalski from Detroit, burns through his remaining ammunition trying to drive off the Zeros. When his guns run dry, he keeps swinging the turret, hoping the Japanese pilots won't realize he can't shoot back. The waist gunners fare no better. Technical Sergeant James Rodriguez from El Paso manages to hit 1-0, seeing his tracers spark off its wing. But his gun jams immediately afterward. He tears at the charging handle, trying to clear the malfunction, knowing that every second without defensive fire makes little Dixie an easier target. Then the other Zeros peel off. Low on fuel and ammunition, they turn back toward base. Only Kitamura remains. He slides his Zero into formation alongside little Dixie, matching the bomber's speed. Inside the damaged B-17, the crew reacts with confusion and terror. Why is the Japanese pilot staying with them? Why isn't he attacking? Captain Henderson, fighting to keep his aircraft level with only 3 working engines, risks a glance to his left. The Zero is right there, 30 feet away. Close enough that Henderson can see the pilot clearly. A young man. Enemy markings on his aircraft. But also just another pilot dealing with the reality of flight and combat and survival. For 30 seconds, the 2 aircraft fly parallel courses. Neither attacking. Neither fleeing. Just existing in the same space, bound by the physics of flight and the mystery of human decision-making. In the Zero's cockpit, Kitamura is having a conversation with himself. The tactical part of his mind catalogs facts. Damaged enemy bomber, defenseless, easy kill, his duty is clear. But another part of his mind, a part he's been trying to suppress for months, asks different questions. What will killing these men accomplish? They're already out of the fight. Their aircraft is so badly damaged it might not make it home anyway. Does destroying it now when they can't shoot back make you a warrior? Or just an executioner? His training provides ready answers. An enemy aircraft destroyed is one less threat tomorrow. Mercy is weakness. Hesitation gets you killed. But none of these responses address the fundamental question gnawing at him. Can I kill defenseless men and still call myself honorable? The Japanese warrior code, Bushido, emphasizes courage, duty, and loyalty. But it also emphasizes a concept called GI, righteousness or honor. There is supposed to be honor in combat. In testing yourself against a worthy opponent. In defeating an enemy through superior skill or courage. But where is the honor in shooting men who can't shoot back? Kitamura edges his Zero closer. Through the B-17's waist window he can see one of the American gunners clearly now. A young man, maybe even younger than Kitamura. The American is holding his jammed machine gun, still trying to clear the malfunction even though he must know it's hopeless. The dedication to duty is obvious. In another life, another war, this American gunner might have been someone Kitamura could respect. Maybe even befriend. The American looks up. Their eyes meet across 30 feet of air. 2 pilots who share nothing except the experience of flight and the proximity of death. The American's expression isn't hatred. It's resignation. Acceptance. He knows what's coming. He's waiting for it. His hands have stopped working on the jammed gun. He's just watching Kitamura. Waiting to see what the Japanese pilot will decide. This is the moment that cracks Saburo Kitamura's carefully constructed warrior identity. Because in that American gunner's face, he sees something his training never prepared him for. A mirror. This young man, enemy though he is no different from Kitamura. He enlisted because his country was at war. He trained as best he could. He's trying to do his duty and get home alive. If their nationalities were reversed, Kitamura might be in that bomber. That American might be in this Zero. And the American would probably let him live. Kitamura doesn't know this with certainty. But something in that exhausted, resigned face suggests it. Suggests that this gunner, like Kitamura, joined the military to serve his country, not to commit murder. That he kills when he must but takes no joy in it. That he, too, struggles with the contradiction between duty and decency. Kitamura's finger lifts off the trigger. His decision is made before he consciously realizes he's making it. He can't kill these men. Not like this. Not when they're helpless. Not when doing so would serve no purpose except adding to his kill count. The warrior code his instructors drilled into him demands obedience and ruthless efficiency. But a deeper code, one he didn't know he possessed, demands something else. Honor that exists independent of orders. He edges his Zero away from the bomber. Radios his squadron leader with the lie about conserved ammunition. Watches as little Dixie limps northward toward New Guinea. The American gunner is still visible in the waist window, watching Kitamura's Zero pull away. Does he understand what just happened? Does he realize he was spared? Will he tell his crew that the Japanese pilot chose mercy? Kitamura will never know. Little Dixie becomes a speck, then disappears into the tropical haze. The Zero's engine drones steadily as Kitamura turns south toward Rabaul. His aircraft is undamaged. His fuel is sufficient. His ammunition load is nearly full. By all objective measures, the mission was successful. His squadron shot down 2 bombers and damaged several others. They will receive commendations. But Saburo Kitamura knows something fundamental has changed. He disobeyed an order. Showed mercy to an enemy. allowed a damaged bomber to escape when he had the power to destroy it. In the rigid hierarchy of the Imperial Japanese military, these actions border on the unthinkable. And yet, as his Zero approaches Rabaul and he prepares to land, Kitamura feels no guilt. Only a strange sense of peace. For the first time since the war began, he made a decision based not on training or doctrine or orders, but on his own moral judgment. And he can live with that decision. The question is, can he live with its consequences? The consequences begin immediately upon landing. Kitamura's squadron leader, Lieutenant Commander Nakamura, watches the Zeros touch down and taxi to dispersal. He's counting. 18 aircraft took off. 18 return. No losses. Excellent. But something in Kitamura's after-action report doesn't align. You engaged a damaged B-17? Nakamura asks. Affirmative. But didn't destroy it? The aircraft was damaged beyond operational recovery. I assessed that continuing the engagement would waste ammunition needed for the return flight. Nakamura studies Kitamura's face. The younger pilot's expression reveals nothing. His military bearing is perfect. But Nakamura has commanded fighter units for 3 years. He can read pilots the way chess masters read board positions. And something in Kitamura's answer doesn't feel right. Your ammunition load? Approximately 60% remaining, sir. 60%. More than enough to shred a damaged bomber. Nakamura knows it. Kitamura knows that he knows it. But the commander simply nods. Very well. Dismissed. That night, Kitamura lies in his bunk listening to the other pilots trade stories. Their accounts grow more dramatic with each telling. Zeros were outnumbered 5-1. American fighters fought with desperate courage. Every kill was a hard-won victory against determined opponents. The truth, of course, is different. Most of the day's engagements were one-sided. Japanese pilots with superior aircraft and training slaughtering American crews who never had a chance. Kitamura doesn't join the storytelling. He's replaying his own engagement, examining his decision from every angle. The tactical analysis is clear. He made the wrong choice. A damaged enemy bomber that survives might be repaired. Its crew will fly again. They will drop bombs on Japanese positions. By showing mercy, Kitamura potentially caused future Japanese deaths. But the moral calculation is equally clear. Those men were defenseless. Killing them would have been murder. Not combat. Not honorable warfare. Just killing for the sake of killing. And Kitamura discovers something surprising. He values his own honor more than his military reputation. Being able to live with himself matters more than being an ace pilot. This realization should comfort him. Instead, it creates a deeper problem. Because if he can't kill defenseless enemies, what happens the next time? And the time after that? War doesn't pause for moral deliberation. In combat, hesitation kills. Not just the hesitant pilot but his wingmen, his squadron mates. Everyone depending on him to do his duty without question. The Japanese military philosophy doesn't accommodate individual moral judgment. The system works because everyone follows orders instantly and completely. One pilot deciding to apply his own ethics creates unpredictability. And unpredictability in combat gets people killed. Kitamura understands this logically. But understanding doesn't make the contradiction disappear. December 9, 1942. The squadron flies escort for bombers attacking Port Moresby. Kitamura performs flawlessly. When American P-40 fighters intercept, he shoots down 2 in the span of 4 minutes. Both kills are clean. Tactical. The American pilots were fighting back, firing at him, trying to kill him. His actions were defensive. Necessary. Justified. But on the flight back to Rabaul, his formation encounters a lone American fighter. A P-40 Warhawk trailing smoke, obviously damaged, heading toward Allied territory. The P-40 pilot doesn't seem aware of the Zero formation above and behind him. He's too focused on keeping his damaged aircraft flying. An easy kill. Kitamura's squadron mates ignore it. They're low on fuel and eager to get home. Kitamura holds position. Watches the damaged P-40 limp away. Could dive down and destroy it in seconds. But the pilot isn't threatening anyone. He's just trying to survive. Just like the B-17 crew 2 days ago. And Kitamura realizes his moment of mercy wasn't an aberration. It was a revelation. He's changed. He can still fight. Still kill when necessary. But he can't bring himself to kill the helpless. This creates an impossible situation. The war is escalating. American forces are strengthening. Combat is becoming fiercer, more desperate. The easy victories of early 1942 are ending. By mid-1943, Japanese pilots will be outnumbered and often outmatched. The military will demand maximum aggression. Every opportunity to destroy enemy aircraft must be seized. Pilots who hesitate, who show mercy, who apply personal ethics to combat decisions, will be seen as liability. Kitamura knows this. Knows his newfound conscience is incompatible with the war's brutal arithmetic. But he can't unknow what he's learned. Can't unsee the faces of the men he chose not to kill. Can't return to the simple certainty of his training that divided the world into us and them, allies and enemies, warriors and targets. Lieutenant Commander Nakamura calls Kitamura to his office on December 12. The conversation is brief. "You're one of our best pilots," Nakamura says. "Your skills are excellent. Your courage is unquestionable. But something has changed. You're still effective in defensive combat. When you're attacked, you fight with full intensity. But you're no longer pressing attacks against damaged enemies. This is a problem." Kitamura wants to explain. Wants to articulate the distinction he's drawing between combat and execution. But how do you explain moral nuance to a commander who operates in a system that demands absolute obedience? How do you say, "I'm still willing to die for the Emperor, but I'm no longer willing to murder for him," without sounding like a traitor or a coward? "I understand, sir," is all Kitamura says. Nakamura studies him for a long moment. "I'm recommending you for transfer to Homeland Defense. You'll train new pilots. Share your combat experience. Serve honorably without the complications of frontline duty." It's phrased as a promotion. Recognition of Kitamura's skills as a teacher. But both men understand what it really is. A quiet removal of a pilot who no longer fits the mold. Not a punishment. Not a disgrace. Just an acknowledgement that Kitamura's war has become something different from the official one. Kitamura is transferred to Japan in January 1943. He spends the next 2 years training new pilots. Teaching them aerobatics, gunnery, tactics. Everything except the lesson he learned most deeply, that being a warrior doesn't mean abandoning your humanity. That honor can sometimes mean choosing not to kill. That the truest test of character comes not from following orders, but from knowing when those orders conflict with something deeper. His students become aces. Many die in the desperate battles of 1944 and 1945. Kitamura watches them go, knowing he's prepared them as best he can. Knowing also that he sent them into a war that will destroy most of them. And he wonders, if he'd stayed in combat, pressing attacks ruthlessly, killing every enemy he encountered, would it have made any difference? Would the war's outcome have changed? Or would it simply have added more deaths to a catastrophe already measured in millions? April 1945. Saburo Kitamura stands on the flight line at Kasumigaura Naval Air Base, watching his students prepare for their final mission. They are kamikaze pilots. 23 young men, none older than 21, who have volunteered to die for the Emperor. Their aircraft are obsolete trainers and worn-out fighters hastily converted to carry 500-pound bombs. The war has reached its desperate endgame. American forces are approaching Japan itself. Conventional tactics have failed. The military leadership has concluded that suicide attacks offer the only remaining chance to inflict enough damage on the American fleet to force a negotiated peace. The mathematics are brutal but clear. 1 pilot, 1 aircraft, 1 ship sunk. Kitamura's role is to provide final instruction. Teach these young men how to approach a target ship at the optimal angle. How to dive through anti-aircraft fire. How to adjust for wind and identify the most vulnerable parts of a warship. Skills that would normally take years to master, compressed into 3 weeks of intensive training for pilots who will use them exactly once. The official philosophy is that these pilots are not committing suicide. They are making the ultimate sacrifice for the Emperor and the homeland. They will be remembered as heroes. Their families will be honored. They are fulfilling the highest calling of the warrior code. But Kitamura, looking at their young faces, sees something his instructors never acknowledged. These are boys. Children really? Sent to die because the adults who started this war have run out of ideas. One of his students approaches. Flight Petty Officer Kazuo Takahashi, 19 years old, from a small farming village in Kyushu. "Kitamura-san," Takahashi says using the respectful form of address. "Will it hurt? When the aircraft hits?" The question catches Kitamura off guard. Not because it's inappropriate, but because it's the first time any student has admitted to fear. "The impact will be instant," Kitamura says carefully. "You won't feel anything." He has no idea if this is true. But it seems like the kindest answer. Takahashi nods. Then asks the real question. "Did you ever feel afraid? In combat?" This violates every principle of Bushido indoctrination. Warriors don't admit fear. They don't question their courage. They certainly don't ask superiors to validate their anxiety. But Kitamura sees in this boy's face the same thing he saw in that American gunner's face 3 years ago. Simple humanity. The universal desire to not die alone and terrified. "Yes," Kitamura says quietly. "I was afraid many times. But you still fought." "I did. But my fear wasn't of dying. It was of killing unnecessarily. Of becoming something I couldn't live with." Takahashi looks confused. This isn't the lesson he expected. "I don't understand, sir." "You will," Kitamura says. "In your final moments. When you see the ship and you begin your dive. You'll understand that you have a choice. Not whether to obey orders. You've already made that decision. But how you face what's coming. With hatred? With fear? Or with clarity about who you are and what matters?" It's the most honest thing Kitamura has said to any of his students. It's also probably the most dangerous. If reported, this conversation could be seen as undermining morale, questioning the kamikaze program, introducing doubt into minds that are supposed to hold only conviction. But Kitamura has stopped caring about what he's supposed to do. He cares about what these young men deserve, the truth. The next morning, Takahashi and his fellow kamikaze pilots take off on their final mission. Kitamura watches until the formation disappears into low clouds. Only 3 will reach the American fleet off Okinawa. 2 will be shot down by anti-aircraft fire. 1 will hit USS Manor L. Able, a destroyer, sinking it and killing 84 American sailors. The other 20 won't complete their missions. Engine failures, navigation errors, and American fighters will claim them all. Takahashi's aircraft will develop engine trouble 50 miles from Okinawa. He'll turn back toward Japan, lose altitude over open ocean, and ditch near a small island. He'll survive the impact, swim to shore, and live out the rest of the war in hiding, convinced he's failed his duty. In 1946, after the surrender, he'll return to his village and spend the next 60 years wondering if he unconsciously sabotaged his own aircraft to avoid dying. Kitamura won't learn Takahashi's fate until a veterans reunion in 1992. By then, both men will be in their 70s. Takahashi will approach him with tears streaming down his face. "You gave me permission," he'll say. "That last conversation. You gave me permission to stay human. I think my subconscious chose life because you showed me that was acceptable." Kitamura won't know how to respond. Did his moment of honesty save Takahashi's life? Or did it plant the seed of doubt that prevented the young pilot from fulfilling his mission? In the logic of 1945, that mission failure meant continued war. More American casualties. More Japanese casualties. More cities firebombed. More suffering for everyone. But in the logic of being human, Takahashi survived. Returned to his village. Married. Raised children. Became a grandfather. Lived a life that would have been erased if he'd successfully completed his kamikaze mission. Can Kitamura regret that? Should he regret it? These are the questions that haunt warriors who dare to apply moral judgment to warfare. Every choice creates ripples. Saving one life might extend the war that kills thousands. But ending one life, even an enemy's, diminishes the humanity of the killer. There are no clean answers. No purely right choices. Only the burden of deciding and the necessity of living with the consequences. May 1945. The war is clearly lost but continues anyway. American B-29 bombers incinerate Japanese cities night after night. Millions of civilians flee burning homes. The government prepares for a final, suicidal defense of the home islands. Military leaders speak of 100 million deaths as an acceptable price for national honor. Kitamura trains more kamikaze pilots, watches more young men fly toward certain death, and wonders what his moment of mercy over the Coral Sea in December 1942 accomplished. He saved 10 American lives that day. Maybe. The B-17 might have crashed anyway. But assume it didn't. Assume those 10 crew members survived, returned to duty, flew more missions. How many Japanese soldiers died from bombs those same crew members dropped? How many civilians? The mathematics of war never favor mercy. Kindness is inefficient. Compassion is a tactical liability. The most effective warriors are those who kill without hesitation or remorse. The Allies will win this war not through moral superiority but through overwhelming material advantage and absolute willingness to inflict casualties. Fire bombings. Atomic weapons. Complete destruction of the enemy's capacity to resist. From a purely military standpoint, Kitamura's decision to spare that B-17 was a mistake. A moment of weakness that contradicted his training and potentially cost Japanese lives. But from the standpoint of human dignity, it was the moment he reclaimed his soul. The moment he chose to be a man who happened to be a warrior, rather than a warrior who happened to be a man. This distinction matters less than nothing in the context of total war. But it matters everything in the context of a single human life. Saburo Kitamura will survive the war. Return to civilian life. Become a high school teacher. Marry. Have 3 children. And for the rest of his life, whenever students ask about his war experiences, he'll tell them about that moment over the Coral Sea. Not as a story of heroism. Not as a lesson in tactics. But as an example of the one thing war tries hardest to destroy and the one thing most worth preserving. The ability to choose mercy when you have the power to choose death. August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's voice crackles through radio speakers across Japan, announcing surrender. The war is over. Japan has lost. Everything the military promised, every sacrifice demanded, every death proclaimed as heroic has led to this total defeat. Saburo Kitamura listens to the broadcast in a small apartment near Kasumigara Air Base. He feels no surprise. By August 1945, anyone with eyes could see the war was lost. But what he does feel is the weight of accounting. The Imperial Japanese military sacrificed approximately 2.1 million soldiers and sailors. Civilian deaths exceeded 500,000. Cities burned. An empire dissolved. And for what? In the brutal calculus of warfare, Japan's defeat was so complete that every sacrifice, every kamikaze mission, every desperate last stand achieved nothing except adding to the body count. Kitamura thinks about his students, the kamikaze pilots he trained, the young men he watched take off knowing they wouldn't return. He gave them his best instruction, taught them everything he knew, and sent them to die in a cause that was already lost. Could he have refused? Should he have? These aren't abstract questions. They're the ghosts that will haunt him forever. In the occupation years following surrender, Kitamura works odd jobs. Construction. Farming. Anything to support his widowed mother. Japan is devastated. Food is scarce. Cities are rubble. The proud warrior culture that defined Japanese identity for centuries has been crushed absolutely. American occupation forces are everywhere. Kitamura encounters American soldiers regularly. Young men, many of them, probably no older than the kamikaze pilots he trained. He finds himself studying their faces, looking for the same thing he saw in that B-17 gunner's face in 1942, basic humanity. And he finds it. These Americans aren't monsters. They're just men who serve their country and want to go home. Does this mean the war was pointless? That all those deaths, all that suffering, accomplished nothing because the enemies were never actually evil? It's a dangerous thought. The kind that makes veterans question everything they did. But Kitamura can't avoid it. Because if his enemies were human, then killing them required justification beyond, "I was ordered to." 1952. Kitamura becomes a high school teacher. History and literature. He never mentions his war service initially. But students eventually discover his background. A former fighter ace. 27 confirmed kills. 3 years of combat across the Pacific. And suddenly he's being asked to give talks. Share his experiences. Inspire young people with tales of warrior courage. But the talks Kitamura gives aren't what people expect. He doesn't glorify combat. Doesn't speak of honor and valor. Instead he talks about that B-17 over the Coral Sea. About the moment he chose not to kill. About discovering that true strength isn't the power to destroy, but the wisdom to restrain. Some veterans find this offensive. They argue that Kitamura is dishonoring the war dead by questioning the warrior code. That soldiers need absolute conviction, not moral ambiguity. That his moment of mercy was weakness, not strength. And maybe they're right. Maybe Kitamura's doubt would have gotten him killed if he'd stayed in frontline combat longer. But Kitamura notices something interesting. The veterans who criticize him most harshly are those who saw the least actual combat. The ones who fought through 1944 and 1945, who experienced the desperation and horror of the war's final year, are quieter. They nod when he talks about that moment of choice. Some approach him privately to share their own stories. Their own moments when they could have killed but didn't. Their own ghosts. 1960, Japan's economy is recovering. The nation is being rebuilt. A new generation is growing up with no memory of the war. To them it's ancient history. Something their grandparents experienced. Kitamura watches his students discuss World War II as an academic topic, and he realizes that memory is fading. This should comfort him. The war's end means suffering ended. Japan is at peace. His students will never have to make the choices he made. But he also realizes that forgetting has its cost. If future generations don't understand how wars begin, they can't prevent the next one. If they don't grapple with the moral complexity of combat, they'll repeat the same mistakes. So Kitamura writes. Nothing published, just personal journals. Recording everything he remembers. Not just the tactical details but the psychological experience. What it felt like to kill. What it cost to show mercy. How training can make killing feel normal until suddenly it doesn't. How warriors are made and how warriors are broken. He writes about the B-17 over the Coral Sea in obsessive detail. Trying to capture exactly what he saw, what he felt, what he decided. Because that moment, more than any of his official victories, defines who he became. 27 aircraft destroyed made him an ace in military records. 1 aircraft spared made him human in his own eyes. 1978, Kitamura attends a veterans conference in Tokyo. The Japanese self-defense forces are now well established. Young pilots fly F-15 fighters, sophisticated jets that would have seemed like science fiction in 1945. Kitamura speaks with some of these modern pilots. They're professional, well-trained, bound by international laws of war that didn't exist when he flew. One young pilot asks about the difference between flying in World War II versus today. Kitamura thinks carefully before answering. "We were taught that the enemy was subhuman," he finally says. "That killing them wasn't murder because they weren't really people. That mercy was weakness and hesitation was failure." "And now?" the young pilot asks. "Now," Kitamura says, "you're taught rules of engagement, proportionality, distinction between combatants and civilians. You're given a framework for making moral decisions in combat. We weren't. We just had orders and the expectation of absolute obedience." "Did you follow orders?" Kitamura smiles slightly. "Mostly. But not always. And the times I didn't are the ones I remember most clearly." March 2003. Saburo Kitamura is 81 years old. His health is failing. He knows he doesn't have much time left. A documentary filmmaker has asked to interview him about his war experiences. Kitamura almost refuses. He's tired of talking about the war. Tired of being defined by something he did 6 decades ago. But the filmmaker asks specifically about the B-17 incident. How does she know about it? Kitamura has mentioned it in talks, but never with enough detail to make it noteworthy. I found American records, the filmmaker explains, from the 43rd Bombardment Group. A B-17 called Little Dixie returned from a mission on December 7, 1942, with extensive damage. The crew reported being shadowed by a Japanese Zero that never attacked. They assumed the pilot was low on ammunition or had gun malfunctions. But your squadron records show no such mechanical issues. Kitamura feels something like electricity run through him. They survived. All of them. The bomber made it to Port Moresby with minutes of fuel remaining. One crew member later died of wounds, but the other 9 survived the war. Several are still alive. Would you like to meet them? The filmmaker has arranged a video conference. Technology Kitamura barely understands, but his grandson has helped set up. On the screen appears an elderly American man, clearly frail but with sharp eyes. Captain Robert Henderson, the American says. I was the pilot of Little Dixie. Kitamura's breath catches. 61 years later, he's face to face with the man he chose not to kill. I remember you, Henderson says. I saw you in the Zero cockpit. Close enough that I could see your face. You were young. Maybe my age. And you looked. He pauses, searching for words. You looked conflicted. Like you were having an argument with yourself. Then you pulled away. I couldn't kill you, Kitamura says in careful English. You were defenseless. We thought it was a mechanical issue with your guns. No. My aircraft was fully functional. I chose not to fire. There's a long silence. Henderson's face works through several expressions. Finally he says, why? It's the same question Kitamura has asked himself for 6 decades. Because I realized that killing you wouldn't make me a better warrior. It would make me a murderer. There's a difference between combat and execution. I had been trained not to see that difference. But in that moment I couldn't ignore it anymore. Henderson nods slowly. I went on to fly 37 more missions. We dropped a lot of bombs. Probably killed Japanese soldiers. Maybe civilians. Does that bother you? Yes, Kitamura says honestly. But not because you did it. Because war created the necessity. If you had died that day, another crew would have flown those missions. The war would have continued. My choice didn't change the outcome. It only changed me. It changed me too, Henderson says. I knew somehow that you made a conscious decision to let us live. It took me years to process what that meant. That my enemy saw me as human. That mercy was possible even in total war. After the war I became a teacher. High school English. And I told my students about that day. About the Japanese pilot who chose not to kill. Kitamura feels tears on his face. He didn't expect this. Didn't expect confirmation that his choice mattered. Not strategically. Not in terms of the war's outcome. But in terms of 2 lives, his and Henderson's, that were changed by a moment of mercy. Do you regret it? Henderson asks. What you did? No, Kitamura says. Never. It was the only time in the war I made a decision that was purely my own. Not following orders. Not applying doctrine. Just choosing what kind of man I wanted to be. I wish I could say it changed how I fought afterward. But it didn't. I continued flying missions. Continued killing. The war had its own momentum. But that moment showed me that even in war we still have choices. We're not just machines following programming. I lived 61 more years because of your choice, Henderson says quietly. I saw my children grow up. Held my grandchildren. Taught thousands of students. Had a life. And I owe all of that to an enemy pilot who showed mercy when he didn't have to. And I've carried the weight of my other kills for 61 years, Kitamura responds. The men I did shoot down. The pilots who might have had families. Lives. Futures. Your survival doesn't erase them. It just shows that mercy was possible. That I could have chosen differently more often. That the warrior code I was taught was incomplete. The conversation lasts 2 hours. They share stories. Compare experiences. Find that despite fighting on opposite sides, their fundamental struggles were identical. How to maintain humanity in dehumanizing circumstances. How to follow orders without losing your soul. How to kill when necessary without becoming a killer by nature. When the video conference ends, Kitamura sits in his quiet apartment for a long time. His grandson asks if he's okay. I'm better than okay, Kitamura says. I just learned that mercy matters. Even one moment of mercy. Even in a war where millions died. It matters because it reminds us that we're more than our circumstances. More than our orders. More than our training. We're human beings capable of choosing compassion even when everything around us demands cruelty. Saburo Kitamura dies 6 months later. At his funeral, his family discovers something tucked in his personal effects. a photograph of a B-17 bomber. On the back, in Kitamura's careful handwriting, "Little Dixie, the plane I didn't shoot down. The choice that defined me." The story of Saburo Kitamura and Little Dixie exists at the margins of World War II's official histories. No battle turned on it. No strategy changed because of it. In the vast machinery of total war involving millions of combatants and resulting in over 70 million deaths, this single moment of mercy is statistically insignificant. But statistics don't capture what makes us human. They don't measure the weight of conscience or the cost of moral choice. They can't quantify what it means to choose honor over obedience, mercy over efficiency, humanity over doctrine. And they certainly can't measure the ripple effects of one decision across 6 decades of life. Because Captain Henderson's survival meant more than just one life saved. It meant children who were born, students who were taught, a family that continued. It meant that somewhere in America Henderson told his story and other people heard it, and perhaps they made different choices because of it. Ripples spreading outward from a single moment of mercy over the Coral Sea. And Kitamura's choice changed him fundamentally. It didn't make him a pacifist. He continued flying combat missions. Continued killing when combat demanded it. But it gave him a framework for understanding the difference between necessary violence and unnecessary cruelty. Between being a warrior and being a murderer. Between following orders and retaining your soul. The warrior codes that dominated World War II taught that mercy was weakness. That hesitation killed. That the only good enemy was a dead enemy. These doctrines made tactical sense in a context of total war where every advantage mattered. But they came at a cost that military histories rarely calculate, the cost to the warriors themselves. Because killing changes you. Every combat veteran knows this. The first time is traumatic. The 10th time is easier. By the 30th it can become mechanical. Almost routine. And that routineness, that transformation from shocking to normal, represents a kind of death. Not physical but spiritual. The death of the part of you that insists killing should be difficult. That ending a human life should exact a psychological price. Kitamura's choice not to shoot down Little Dixie was, paradoxically, an act of self-preservation. Not of his life but of his humanity. By refusing to kill defenseless men, he maintained the boundary between warrior and murderer. He proved to himself that he wasn't just a weapon programmed to kill on command. He was a human being capable of moral judgment even under pressure. This distinction matters profoundly in the aftermath of war. Veterans who maintain their humanity during combat can reintegrate into civilian life. They carry trauma, certainly. They have nightmares and complicated memories. But they can look at themselves in the mirror without seeing a monster. Veterans who lost that humanity, who killed reflexively and without restraint, often struggle to rejoin society. The distance between their wartime selves and their civilian selves becomes unbridgeable. Modern military training increasingly recognizes this reality. Rules of engagement. Proportionality. Distinction between combatants and non-combatants. These aren't just humanitarian principles. They're psychological protection for the warriors who must carry out military operations. They provide a framework for maintaining moral identity even while engaging in morally complicated actions. But World War II predated this understanding. Warriors like Kitamura were told to kill without questioning. To show no mercy. To view the enemy as subhuman. And then, when the war ended, they were expected to simply turn off those instincts and become peaceful citizens. The psychological wreckage this created haunted an entire generation. Saburo Kitamura found a middle path. He served his country, followed orders, fought with skill and courage. But he also maintained the right to make moral judgments in moments when military necessity didn't override human decency. This made him, perhaps, a less efficient warrior. But it made him a complete human being. The fact that he and Captain Henderson eventually connected, that they could share their experiences and understand each other, validates something essential about the human experience. War tries to divide us into us and them, friend and enemy, the side that deserves to live and the side that must die. But underneath the uniforms and the ideologies, we're all just human beings trying to survive. Trying to do what we believe is right. Trying to reconcile the demands of duty with the demands of conscience. There's no purely happy ending here. Thousands of other bombers were shot down. Thousands of other crews died. The war continued with its grinding, mechanical brutality regardless of Kitamura's moment of mercy. In the grand scheme nothing changed. But for 2 men, 1 Japanese pilot and 1 American bomber captain, everything changed. Because for the rest of their lives, they carried proof that mercy was possible even in history's deadliest conflict. That humanity could survive even in circumstances designed to destroy it. That the choice to preserve life, even enemy life, even one time, mattered more than 27 official kills or 100 successful missions. Saburo Kitamura's story isn't about questioning military service or suggesting that warriors should disobey orders. It's about the reality that even in war, especially in war, we remain moral beings responsible for our choices. That following orders doesn't absolve us of conscience. That being a warrior doesn't mean surrendering your humanity. The Japanese pilot who couldn't pull the trigger taught us something his instructors never intended, that true strength isn't the power to kill without hesitation. It's the wisdom to know when killing serves no purpose beyond adding to the suffering. And the courage to choose differently even when everything around you demands otherwise. That B-17 limping away over the Coral Sea, damaged but alive, its crew exhausted but breathing, represents the smallest possible victory in the largest possible war. But it's the victory that mattered most. Not because it changed the war's outcome, but because it proved that even in hell, conscience survives. Even in total war, mercy is possible. Even when we're trained to be weapons, we can choose to remain human. And in the end, when statistics fade and official histories are forgotten, that choice, that moment, that decision to spare lives when you have the power to take them, is what defines us. Not as warriors. Not as enemies. But as human beings who, even in the darkest circumstances, found the light of compassion and chose to follow it. Captain Robert Henderson died in 2004 at age 86. Saburo Kitamura died in 2003 at age 81. Their single conversation occurred 6 months before Kitamura's death. Both men's families have reported that their fathers carried the weight of World War II for their entire lives, but that the meeting provided a sense of peace neither had fully experienced before. The human cost of war extends far beyond the battlefield, into the conscience of every warrior who must live with what they did and what they chose not to do.